Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Thanks again for joining us here in person and virtually as well. This is our 9th and final formal hearing for the inquiry respecting the treatment, experiences, and outcomes of Innu in the child protection system. I'm joined here by Commissioners Devine and Commissioner Cupie, and as well the inquiry officials and presenters. We'd like to begin by asking you to stand as we remember the memory of Elder Swashim Nui and also Elder Jangesh Panashwi, who have been part of this inquiry since we started.
So I again want to acknowledge. Oh, okay. Okay, I'd like to again acknowledge the elders that played such an integral role in this inquiry, and the knowledge that they've shared and the wisdom and the leadership that they provided in the inquiry. So I'd like to say my prayers in Innu and thinking about them. And I know John Goose is traveling from Ottawa after joining the leadership at the Assembly First Nations. So I wish them safe travels when they're on their way home. So I'll say the prayer in Innu. Kat taniga hon koksat kotot kaminot manidot chimit. Kat benemin ano jis chebost umwe jishok kaminin. Ntabweten nika utnen kasno jewan eshnagwak je ishbab nugwe. Wishmak jisho jenamatan tashib jeshajin. Tabwe jisho jenamatan jeji wijin de je etwane. Kapashat Staton, Bacon Kamashat Eton. Chiga Ispatandagan Espashajidan Ertosestadan. Jinaskumatan Jin Gaitenamin, Jiji Minuatagoshan. Astam Wiji, Jiji Kasno, Mantotok Owen, Janetsko Kasagant, Jiji Minuatagoshit Gewin. Dande Kamat Nomdona Not Minuatagoshun. Ano Mashauke, ano Shuchimagan. Kata Benamin Abu Begusian, Nantam Jatan Dentate. We mean Abu Takwak Jeji Shechian. Jean Deshwabaden, J. Ishpanian, ano Jishkashagat. We me Kata Benamin, Jiniskumatan, Jewin, ano Jishkashagat. Espeshajidan. Chipachet namadan kasno chewan chedodaman ano jishkashakat chimit. Taniga hong koksat kotot kaminut mento chimit. Thank you. Skumatno.
The Commissioner Cupie. In that prayer, we also remember Elder Panodi Antoine, Elder Nympha Byrne, for all the assistance they've given us from day one through these 4 years. But I'll also now ask Commissioner Devine to speak.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I just want to kind of do a brief review of the hearings that we've had since we started in May of 22. And up to now, there have been 8 formal hearings to learn from Innu elders, professionals, and expert witnesses with knowledge of the child protection system, as well as researchers. We heard from over 100 Innu about their experiences in the communities and, importantly, in the country. We investigated the treatment experiences and ultimately the deaths of 6 Innu youth who experienced time in care of the child protection system. This will be our final formal hearing. and are actually our final visit to the community, if you like. And we expect to hear today from, or we'll be hearing from, the Child Youth Advocate, from the Government of Canada, Innu Representative Organisation, and the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we've set aside Friday morning also in case we need it, and so that there's no, so people can present as they wish and not feel the time constraints in their important submissions. Thank you.
I'll now hand it over to lead counsel, Caitlin Urquhart, please, to speak to the parties.
Thank you, and good morning, commissioners, council, and members of the public in present and watching virtually. This morning, as the commissioners have mentioned, it is our final formal hearing. So the first thing I'd like to do a bit of housekeeping and enter some exhibits. We're going to be entering P450 to 452, as well as P458 to 575. So we now I'll pass it over to the counsel for the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate, Andrew Fitzgerald, who will be presenting virtually this morning. And we'll just get him online. Just one moment, we can't hear you. Try one more time.
Good morning.
There, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, good. I know we're running a little behind this morning, and that's fine. But I do have some comments to make, and I don't want to go on at length because we did provide a written submission to the inquiry from the Child and Youth Advocate. I guess at the outset, my client importantly wishes to emphasize that the loss of any child is a tragedy for parents, siblings, extended family, and community. And we certainly offer our sincere condolences to all participants in this inquiry who have experienced such a loss. Over the last 4 years, we've also heard about the impacts, long-standing impacts of colonialism, intergenerational trauma, and racism, and the impact that this has had on the Innu communities and their children. The Child Advocate acknowledges this history and the difficulties and challenges it continues to cause. While it's important to recognize the historical context, we have focused our submission on current day, present day, and the future. And in particular, you'll note in our submission our concern about the rights of Innu children during the transition of the ultimate Innu taking over jurisdiction of child protection. Just a couple of preliminary points. We do accept, and we noted in our memorandum, the rights, the analysis of the Human Rights Commission from a human rights perspective. They certainly have expertise in that area, and it was very helpful for us to read and review. And then upon reflection, we thought about our role in this inquiry and what our role really and truly is. The role of the Child and Youth Advocate is not only limited to investigations and reviews. It's also an advocate. It's an advocate for the rights of children and youth. That should not be lost on this commission. We recognize that we heard from a lot of experts. We've heard from civil servants, public servants. We've heard from the communities, and we've heard from a lot of elders. But we can't ignore the voices of children and youth. And from our perspective and our client's perspective, that needs to be kept at the forefront as the communities move forward. From a rights perspective, we've highlighted the fact that Canada is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And in that convention, children's rights matter. Children's voices should be heard. They should be listened to. Pardon me. Oftentimes, the voices of children, not intentionally, get lost in the bigger picture, in the bigger bureaucracy, in the bigger issues that are out there. Their voices get lost because they're not as loud often as the voices of adults and communities in general. But the future leaders of the Innu community are going to be its children, and we believe that any future system should have their input, should have their consultation about what they want their community to look like now and in the future. The Child Advocate is supportive of an Innu-led child protection system. But we note, and we did note in our submission, that an Innu Roundtable Secretariat refers to this as a big transition. It's going to take a lot of work by everybody. And it's during this transition period that the rights of all Innu children and youth need to be recognized and protected. The rights to live a safe and happy life, a protected life, an enjoyable life need to continue and improve as we move forward. In our brief, we've highlighted some what we believe as systemic issues that were evident, I would say, throughout the inquiry. And when you look at those systemic failures or gaps or limitations in the context of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, there's an obligation on the state to provide meaningful supports and timely access to early intervention and prevention services. By not doing so, this would be a failure on the state. There also needs to be timely access to mental health supports and addiction services and legal assistance in the community. The absence of these services would also be denial of child's rights. It was also evident throughout the inquiry that the department, and it's changed its names over the years, but ultimately it's SSWB now, was responsible for basically everything in these communities. In order to improve the system, there needs to be an approach, an intergovernmental approach. More people need to be involved. More people need to cooperate. By doing it that way, instead of operating in silos, we would suggest that it's going to improve the lives of all children and youth in those communities. The Child and Youth and Family Services Act is currently under review. Our client made a submission to government on that. It's at paragraph 22 of our client's submission. I do not intend to read it out, but I do believe it provides significant guidance on the importance of early prevention and intervention services for communities. In our submission, we've also addressed the human resources issues that the province itself struggles with on a daily basis. But those struggles cannot negatively impact one group over another, and the rights of Innu children and youth are just as important as anybody else. They have a right to access social workers and community. They have a right to have these services in a timely fashion. And we would encourage improvement in recruitment and retention strategies to make this successful in the future. The Child Advocate is concerned with the rotational model for staffing. We recognize that this was a best efforts attempt by all to try and improve the situation in the communities. However, it's not a permanent solution. And I would point out that in 2025, the Advocate recommended to the Department of Families and Affordabilities that the fly-in and fly-out model undergo an evaluation to ensure it was meeting its mandate and its effectiveness. From what we know to date, this evaluation has not occurred, and it should. We have also importantly addressed transitional supports in our memorandum, as we believe that it's fundamentally important that if children are coming out of care, that the planned transition back into community be prioritized, so children get the necessary supports they need in coming back into community. Without such planning, negative outcomes may continue. Transitional supports should also not be limited to the children. We believe support should be available to the families so that if there are issues, that they can get support, that they can be supported by, supported on, that this happens if children are in care or if children are out of community. Healthy families lead to healthy communities and lead to healthy children. And we believe support should happen in a holistic manner as opposed to in silos or independently. Finally, in our submission, we have included the independent review that the Child Advocate did of child protection services to the Inuit children in the province. We recognize that every individual in every community is different, but there were themes identified in that we believe that the Commission can build upon, and we believe it is a good resource, and we've included it in our submission. The report was referenced glowingly by Justice English in his evidence, and we do encourage the Commission to review same. We have also included a number of considerations for the Commission to consider in our submissions. I also do not intend to repeat those word by word or consideration by consideration. Fundamentally, this is about the rights of children and youth from my client's perspective. My client is independent, and certainly will continue to advocate and monitor the rights of all children in Newfoundland and Labrador, and in particular the rights of the Inuit children and youth, and any recommendations flowing out of this inquiry. To sum up, I guess the last paragraph of my brief essentially states our position, and I will quote from that. The UNCRC applies to Inuit children and youth, and their voices must be heard as the Inuit plan to assume jurisdiction over child protection. To ensure successful transfer, there must be support and cooperation from all levels of government. It takes a village to raise a child, and the Inuit were successful in doing this prior to the colonial policies and views being forced upon them. There is no reason to doubt, with the proper supports, cooperation, and hard work, that reconciliation can continue and Inuit children and youth can thrive and prosper in their own communities consistent with their rights as set out in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Those are my submissions, and the Advocate would like to thank you for allowing us to provide these oral submissions today in addition to our written submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitzgerald. In thinking of your comments on behalf of your clients, as commissioners, we want to say that throughout the term of the inquiry, we've been positively impacted by the insight and by the empathy expressed from provincial government, ministers, deputy ministers, managers, and particularly social workers who, thankfully, from our perspective, gave apologies and sought forgiveness as well. And to hear that from your client, as well as the expression of hope for the future, bodes well. And we ask that all the parties involved continue in this vein of seeing the inquiry as a start of a process that will lead to Innu self-determination, especially in child protection. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further, commissioners, we'll say thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. You're welcome to stay on the line, but you won't have your face on the screen here. So appreciate your submissions, both in writing and orally. And that's all for the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate. Our next speaker would be Victor Ryan on behalf of the Government of Canada, if you are ready to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. We invite you and very happy to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, commissioners, and good morning, everybody. It is a privilege to be here today offering Canada's closing submissions to the inquiry respecting the treatment, experiences, and outcomes of Innu in the child protection system. This week has marked a new phase of the important work of this inquiry as you transition from collecting evidence and truth-seeking to drafting a final report and giving your recommendations to the province and to the Innu Nation. It is a bittersweet moment to reflect with pride on the work we have all done together, but also to honor the Innu children, families, and communities whose negative experiences, pain, and trauma have been so central to that work. Canada has provided written final submissions to the inquiry, which outline Canada's role in this inquiry, the current federal role in the child protection system with respect to Innu, and the unique constitutional context of the federal government's participation in a provincial public inquiry. Our oral submissions today will focus on some lasting impressions which have arisen from Canada's participation in this inquiry and a reaffirmation of Canada's commitment to be a partner with Innu and with the province to support the safety of Innu families and the dignity of Innu. And I want to start with that notion of the dignity of Innu. Canada has heard through the stories and the evidence of Innu at this inquiry that too often being Innu and Innu ways are looked down on. Innu can be made to feel like they don't belong and that their language and culture is not important. This has happened in the past, and unfortunately, it can still happen in the present. However, the truth-seeking that this inquiry has done has shown just the opposite. Innu are strong people, individually and collectively. Not only are Innu ways of being important for Innu, but non-Innu can learn much from the Innu philosophy and the Innu culture. And nowhere has this been more overwhelmingly clear than in the stories and evidence of Innu when they discuss Nuchimit. Canada has heard that Nuchimit nourishes and feeds Innu, and that in turn, Innu nourish and feed Nuchimit. Canada has listened when Innu say that the spirit lightens in Nuchimit and things feel more balanced. The healing power of Nuchimit has been an undeniable theme of the experiences and the narratives brought out by this inquiry. Canada has also heard over and over that Innu children belong with their Innu families and communities, and there is wisdom in that idea. The wisdom has not always been understood by non-Innu, and unfortunately that's a phenomenon that is not unique to this area. It's been replicated in other parts of the country. However, the evidence heard by this inquiry demonstrates that the wisdom and good sense of that idea, that Innu children belong with their Innu community, is more and more heard and understood by non-Innu. When the Parliament of Canada passed Bill C-92, an act respecting First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families, they included a preamble in the text of the bill to explain the purpose of the law and the underlying way of thinking which led to its passage. Among other things, the preamble stated, whereas Parliament recognizes the legacy of residential schools and the harm, including intergenerational trauma, caused to Indigenous peoples by colonial policies and practices. Whereas Parliament recognizes the disruption that Indigenous women and girls have experienced in their lives in relation to child and family services systems, and the importance of supporting Indigenous women and girls in overcoming their historical disadvantage. Whereas Parliament recognizes the importance of reuniting Indigenous children with their families and communities from whom they were separated in the context of the provision of child and family services. And whereas Parliament affirms the need to eliminate the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in child and family services systems. I emphasize those portions of the preamble of the new law passed in 2019 because time and time again, Canada has heard the voices of Innu before this inquiry, and they have said similar things. Canada has heard that the Innu want the legacy of colonial practices to be recognized, that Innu know firsthand that child and family services as a system can be disruptive to families, and that the overrepresentation of Innu in the system must be eliminated. Those principles and those ideas are reflected in Canada's new legislation, which establishes national standards and works towards Indigenous control over their children's welfare. I raise that point not as a demonstration of a positive outcome, because as this inquiry has heard, we're not at the end of this process. We all know there's much more work to be done. I say this to highlight a positive beginning, because I think this inquiry can fairly say that right now, Innu and non-Innu alike possess a shared purpose. Of course, there's more work to be done. There's more talking to be had between the Innu, between the province, between Canada. But Canada is heartened that some of the principles set out in the new legislation have been reflected in the hopes and the aspirations that Innu have brought to this inquiry. Since this legislation passed, Canada has been and will continue to be a willing partner in building on that shared purpose with both the Innu and the province. The Act provides clarity that Indigenous communities may give notice that they will exercise authority over child and family services, and Canada has set aside capacity funding to support Indigenous groups to explore and develop what their service delivery models may look like. It is a positive step that the Innu have signaled their intention to exercise authority in this area and that they have accessed federal capacity building funding. Again, this is not to say that the work is over, but to acknowledge that the Innu have made great progress towards their goals, and Canada is committed to working with the Innu on that progress. This inquiry has been conducted at a time of great transition for the province, for the Innu, and for Canada. And in some ways, this has undoubtedly made your work more difficult, as you are tasked with understanding a system which is both complex and also undergoing significant change. However, this can also be a gift, because you as commissioners stand with one eye assessing the things that have been done and with the other looking ahead to the way things are becoming and how they can be in the future. It's a great privilege to bear witness to the hope and the cautious optimism of those who work in the system, which is moving towards a fairer and safer world for Innu families. That hope is tempered by the memory that for too long, Innu who interacted with the Child and Family Services system were not offered hope. And so Canada is thinking and reflecting on all those Innu who shared their stories with this inquiry, and those families whose stories were individually investigated by the inquiry. Canada is thinking today of Faith Rich, James Poker, Kirby Mistanapiao, Jacob Collins, Wally Rich, and Thunderheart Shakabesh. Their loss is a true sorrow, not only for their families and their communities, but for us all. We are all made worse off when our Innu neighbors and friends don't have the opportunity to lead long and healthy lives. In closing, I want to thank the inquiry for giving us the space and the time to reflect on some self-evident truths that Innu have unique histories, culture, and experiences, but that also at the end of the day, what Innu want for their children is not so far off from what we all want for our children and families: safety, happiness, opportunities, the chance to pass on culture. That outcomes for Innu will improve when Innu lead in the design and delivery of child and family services for Innu. Canada is committed to continuing its collaboration with Innu leadership on reform to this area and to supporting the Innu's chosen path with respect to child and family services. We look forward with interest to your final report, which will undoubtedly guide that work for years to come. Canada thanks Innu Nation, the Innu Roundtable Secretariat, Sheshatshiu Innu First Nation, Mushwa Innu First Nation for their leadership in calling for this inquiry and before this inquiry. Canada thanks the province for establishing this inquiry and its continued work and collaboration to improve outcomes for Innu children and families. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Victor, and to Canada. It's hard not to reflect on some of the things that we've heard, and I thank you for your presence in this inquiry, the importance of listening, and the importance of hearing. And as you speak about the historical disadvantages, I reflect on that. Yeah, Innu had no control, and no control of that when that happened, and the colonial practices that they've endured, and that did not work. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate that the inquiry came and that it did the work to listen and bring the communities together, because a lot of times families have felt like it was just only them that was happening when it was a collective. And it was important for elders to understand that this is the door that was opening for communities, that people will hear your experience. And to have acknowledged that is really important. And that with our culture and our language and with the colonial practices that we experience, that didn't die. And that's something that they couldn't take away from us. And I think about our culture and the people supporting at the inquiry at the table who sat around the table. They now have a chance to to build the tent with us and to understand and experience that, what it's like for people. And so that is a gift that the communities have given to the people outside. And I know that they would welcome the people to come and build that tent with us. And I've heard so many years that when elders say, when will this stop? When will this stop? And today's, over the last 4 years, it's been a hard break for them to come forward and share their stories of those traumas and those experiences. So I again would like to thank you for your oral presentation and the submissions that you've made to the inquiry. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I extend my thanks as well. And like Commissioner Nastash, I will call you Victor, simply because I knew you as a child and I worked with your mother. And you have the burden of responsibility to carry the honor of the crown. And we hope that that relationship will continue as the inquiry concludes one aspect of his work, but we realize there's much to be done and much cooperation required to make that work. Continue in the footsteps your mother started.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate the many important points that you've brought up this morning. I think one of the things that sticks with me is that it's a bittersweet moment. When I think about, and I'm sure everybody here, about some of the stories that we've heard from the Innu, speaking their truths, and some of the many different tragedies, the deaths, of course, which are, quite sorrowful things to even think about and talk about, but also the lives that have been impacted. And I'm going to repeat what I've said now a number of times. When one of the death investigations, Faith Ridge, that we did, it really struck home to me that in that room there were 4 generations. There was Faith Ridge's child, there was Faith Ridge who had passed, her mother, and the grandmother. And so the grandmother's, she experienced that, I think it was a pivotal point in the forced settlement where the severe trauma, and I say severe trauma, happened. And I will say that it never really was dealt with. Systems were brought in like the child protection system. Intent, I would say good. Outcome, terrible. And so we can't lose sight of that as we look forward. We have to honor the Innu and what they've been through and seek to have some understanding. We'll never understand it as non-Innu. Seek some understanding of what actually they are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. The term historical trauma is often used. I don't like it because it's not just history, it's today. It continues. It's continued through 4 generations. And so looking forward, the many things that you brought up, points that you brought up and acknowledged, I think were very important. And also to acknowledge that the Government of Canada, Government of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Innu themselves, and others who have information that we have from many different sources, and these final submissions now that sort of highlight some of the key points that we have been putting our mind to will help guide us in coming up with something that will indeed provide some good direction, we hope, for this new beginning. And so just to end on that positive note of the beginnings and continue to work. People have been doing some good work, certainly since this past 10 years or so, and things are happening. I really hope and that momentum will continue well beyond the inquiry. The inquiry has made these issues public, and they put them to the forefront. And let's really hope, and I'll say pray, that they don't get put on the back burner after this inquiry is done. And because there's been some history of that hasn't been great. So hopefully that will continue. Thank you very much.
I'd ask that we take a break for at least 20 minutes. We have some clients who are hoping to come in. They're going to join virtually now? Okay. So I guess I'll leave it to the commissioners if you'd like to have a brief break now before we'll need to move the speakers. 15 minutes. Thank you. So 10:30.